Hi, everyone. This is Emily Wayland with a short news break. I am recording this on Sunday, June 22nd, 2025. Now, if you've been following political news lately, you might know that the Republican controlled U.S. Congress is working on its budget reconciliation package, aka the Big Beautiful Bill Act. Well, it's anything but. It's actually a big, ugly bill packed to the brim with horrible policies that are proposed to help funnel wealth away from the lower and middle classes in order to give tax breaks to the richest Americans. But what I would like to discuss today is the proposed sale of public lands wedged into thousands of pages within this horrible bill. In the initial House version of this package, the sale was included, but was ultimately removed before the vote due to public backlash. However, the Senate is working on its version of the bill now, and the sale of these lands is back on the table. So if this big, ugly bill were to pass and make it to the president's desk, it would mean around 3 million acres of public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service would be for sale across 11 states in the western United States. These states include Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. And how this would work is that 250 so million acres of that federal land would become eligible for sale. And then the division mandates that 3 million of that total number must be sold within a 5-year period. However, since all of that hundreds of millions of acres would be available, now the legislation does not include federally protected areas such as national parks and national wilderness areas, but it does include public lands surrounding these areas. And the land on the table would leave tens of millions of acres of lands with wilderness characteristics, wilderness study areas, areas of critical environmental concern, cultural sites, historical sites, and inventoried roadless areas eligible for sale. The Trump Justice Department also issued an opinion that the president can revoke national monument protections under the Antiquities Act. If this administration acts on that legally questionable finding, it could render an additional 13.5 million acres eligible for sale. And you may recall the attacks being made on the Endangered Species Act, right? Yeah, this land grab is all part of this administration's greedy desire to reap our beautiful public lands and resources for the wealthy. Now, some other key takeaways on this proposed sale from the bill's text include a mandate that demands the nomination of tracts be within 30 days, then every 60 days until the arbitrary multi-million acre goal is met, all without public hearings, debate, or public input opportunities. It gives the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture broad discretion to choose which places could be ultimately sold off. Now, we had public comment periods with the proposal to protect the monarchs under the Endangered Species Act and the proposal to rescind critical habitat under the definition of harm within the ESA. We don't know what's going on with those yet, but that is not the case here. This bill also sets up a relatively under-resourced state and local governments to lose open bidding wars due to wheel-heeled commercial interests. It also fails to give sovereign tribal nations the first right of refusal to bid on these lands, even for areas that are a part of their traditional homelands or contain sacred sites. Republican congressmen and senators who support this provision of the bill claim that this proposal is setting aside the land for some infrastructure and affordable housing. And they're basically stating, oh, this is going to be, non-picturesque areas along the highway not really being used. Yeah, none of that is true. Many of these lands contain hiking trails and recreation areas, and many of them surround national parks and monuments, so that would ruin the scenery around our national parks. Many contain beautiful features such as waterfalls, canyons, lakes, and more. And most importantly, wildlife lives in these areas. This is their home, and we're already struggling with pollinator populations declining, and birds declining. We should be conserving, not pulling a once-ler and reaping the land for everything it's worth. That's not a good long-term goal for humanity and the planet. And you're talking about infrastructure, right? Many of these spaces are far from the required infrastructure needed to support affordable housing areas. In fact, certain areas of this package are so remote that they're closed during the winter because they're practically inaccessible during heavy snows and inclement weather. So the senator who wrote the language for the sell-off in this bill is Senator Mike Lee, a Republican of Utah. He has been a long-time advocate for selling off or transferring national public lands. He's questioned the constitutional basis for national public lands and boasted of fighting to make the federal government fulfill its promise on selling off federal lands throughout the West. In addition, he vocally supported Utah's 2024 lawsuit, brought directly to the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way, that would have forced the federal government to dispose of vast amounts of public land, including 18 million acres in Utah, with implications for hundreds of millions of acres nationwide. Utah won that case. It is not a surprise that Senator Lee included this provision in this bill, and it is less of a surprise that his Republican colleagues in the chamber are going along with it, at least so far. Now, there is no doubt that the United States is incredibly politically divided right now. However, protecting our parks, wildlife, and public lands has strong bipartisan support. In fact, a recent poll conducted by Coefficient shows that 75% of people oppose permanently selling off millions of acres of public lands for development. So, how do we fight this thing? Well, the bill has not reached the Senate floor yet, but it will soon. We need to be calling and writing our representatives in the Senate, letting them know that we oppose this sale. It doesn't matter if your senator is Democratic or Republican, and contacting them is our constitutional right, as they are our elected officials, and we need to be telling them how we feel about this legislation that they're proposing. Public pressure works. That is how we were able to stop Republicans from overturning the Affordable Care Act in Trump's first term. Politicians in Congress want to be reelected, no matter how spineless they may seem. And ultimately, we are the ones giving them a job, and they should be worried about their seat. Now, it's probably most important that people within the states mentioned are calling their Republican senators, since they have the most pull here, but it is important if you have a Democrat representing you to voice your opinion too. That way, they can mention it when they are opposing this legislation. We are their direct source, and they are supposed to work for us. So when it comes to contacting your representatives, you can visit congress.gov to find who they are, and you can call them at 212-224-3121, which is the number for the Capitol switchboard. If you call that number, an operator will contact you if you don't know their direct office number, but many of their websites will include that information. They will have offices in DC and offices in your home state. And when you call your offices, you will either leave a voicemail or speak with a staffer, so be sure to leave your name and zip code so that your comment can be tallied. If you aren't sure of what to say, you can use a call script on someplace like fivecalls.org or from another environmental organization. There are many that have spoken out about this, and they've prepared resources for environmental and conservation advocates to use. So I'm just going to read the script from Five Calls so you have an idea. And this would be to my Senator Tammy Baldwin here in Wisconsin. We have a Republican, Ron Johnson, but this is just how the script appeared first on the website, so I'm just going to read it. Hi, my name is Emily Wayland, and I'm a constituent from small town Wisconsin. I might include my zip code and my city directly because they will tally that. I obviously am not going to give you that on the internet, but that is, you do want to leave your zip code, especially if you are leaving a voicemail. I'm calling to urge Senator Tammy Baldwin to oppose H.R. 1, the Budget Reconciliation Bill, and any provisions that authorize the sale of our public lands or use of it for oil, mining, and timber production. Public lands should be protected and preserved, not destroyed by the fossil fuel industry or sold off to fund tax breaks for billionaires and corporations. Thank you for your time and consideration. So like I said, you can, if you're leaving a voicemail, just make sure you get your zip code in there so that they tally it. And if you are nervous about talking to a staffer, it is okay to leave a voicemail during non-office hours. And you can write them as well. But I think calling is the quickest way to get your opinion heard. Now, I would personally add more thoughts to this, such as raising the importance of how these public lands support declining pollinator populations, wildlife, and provide critical habitat to our endangered species. You can tweak it however you want. I personally use Five Calls almost daily. I'm introverted, so I do struggle with what to say and making phone calls in general. I've called for environmental concerns as well as other bills that have come up in the budget reconciliation package. And you can call your House members about this too. They're still a part of the process, as this bill is going to go back and forth probably a couple more times. And they need to be reminded of how unpopular selling public lands off is. So I will leave several resources in our link tree, including Five Calls, so you can help us take action against this harmful provision to sell our beautiful public lands to the highest bidder in order to give tax breaks to the ultra wealthy. I will be watching this issue closely and keep you posted. Thanks for listening, and thank you for being on our team to protect our public lands and parks.